Hello and welcome to Lost Love Chronicles.
Dear listeners, before we get started, drop a quick hi in the comments and let us know where you're tuning in from. Also, if you have any suggestions for us to make the channel better, please let us know. Now let's start with the story. My name is Liam Miles. I'm 40 years old, living in Seattle, Washington. I'm the Chief Financial Officer of Miles Industries, the corporation my father, Gavin Miles, built from nothing. That title, it sounds powerful, prestigious even. But the truth is, I'm only a figurehead, a name on the letterhead, a placeholder. My father, he controls everything, every decision, every contract, every hire. I'm just a puppet in his hands, a faint shadow under the dazzling aura of the Miles family name. I'm not the strong type. I know that. I don't have my father's commanding presence, the way he can walk into a room and make everyone fall silent. I don't have the razor-sharp edge my younger brother, Aiden, inherited, and I certainly don't have the confidence to stand up to them, neither of them. I'm just Liam. The husband, the father, the man who tries to fulfill his duties but always feels like he's falling short. Every morning, I stand in front of the bathroom mirror, staring into my tired eyes. The light's too bright. My face looks older than 40. I ask myself, what am I doing with my life? But then I think of Sean, my son. He's 12 now, so smart that sometimes I feel like I can't keep up with him. Messy brown hair, bright eyes always looking like they're searching for something more. That boy, he sees a world I can't even imagine. A world of circuits and coding and dreams that go beyond the cold concrete of boardrooms and factories. Last year, he entered the school's robotics competition. I remember picking him up after school that day. "Dad, I did it," he shouted as he ran into my arms. His backpack bounced behind him, and his smile, God, that smile lit up his entire face. "You won?" I asked, already knowing the answer. He nodded hard, pressing the small trophy into my hands. "First place." Mr. Hopkins said mine was the best. He even said I should think about MIT. In that moment, with Sean's arms wrapped around me and that little trophy between us, I felt like a real father. Like I wasn't the failure my own father always made me feel like. But of course, Gavin Miles never saw any of that. He never asked about Sean's competition, never asked about my day, never cared. To him, I've always been a disappointment. He's 70 years old now, but you wouldn't know it. Still walks with his back straight. Still has that silver-white hair slicked back like a general going into battle. His face is stern, angular features carved by time and control. And his voice can make grown men sit down mid-sentence. He built Miles Industries into a billion-dollar manufacturing and technology empire. They say he's a legend in the business world. But to me, he's a domineering, patriarchal father. And sometimes more often than I like to admit, a ruthless man. I still remember the times he yelled at my mother, Emma, right in front of me and Aiden. No shame, no hesitation. "Why is dinner cold?" he barked once, slamming his fist on the table. The glasses rattled. I was just helping Liam with his homework, my mother said softly, eyes darting down. "Then maybe Liam should learn to manage his time better," he snapped, not even looking at me. My mother, she's always been gentle. Blonde hair, now streaked with silver. Eyes filled with a sadness that never really fades. She's endured him for over 40 years, and I know, deep down, she's exhausted. One evening, not long ago, I came home late and found her sitting alone in the living room. The lights were off, just the glow of the TV flickering across her face. She held a glass of wine in one hand, her other hand resting on her lap, trembling slightly. Her eyes, they were brimming with tears. I wanted to go to her, to sit beside her, to hug her, to tell her that I understood, that I too was living in his shadow. But I didn't. I couldn't. I was too weak, too afraid. Aiden, my younger brother, is a different story. At 35, Aiden is a younger, sharper version of our father. He's tall, handsome, charismatic in a way that makes people instantly trust him. Aiden has that smile, the kind that lights up a room, that convinces board members to nod along even when they don't understand what he's saying. But I know better. I've seen what's behind that smile. Cunning, cold calculation wrapped in charm. Aiden is the vice president of Miles Industries. My father always talks about him like he's the second coming of himself. Aiden has vision. He'll say never quietly, sometimes during meetings, sometimes at dinner, sometimes directly to my face. "And you, Liam," my father once said during a quarterly review meeting, his voice echoing in the polished glass conference room, "you just sit behind a desk and sign useless papers." The room fell silent. No one dared look at me. I remember staring down at the spreadsheet in front of me, the lines blurring. Those words, I've heard them hundreds of times. Still, every time they cut deep. I don't hate Aiden. I really don't. Perhaps, deep down, I'm just jealous. He has everything I don't: confidence, our father's support, and the ruthlessness needed to thrive in the empire our father built with iron fists and sleepless nights. But I know the truth. Aiden doesn't see me as a brother. Not really. To him, I'm an obstacle, something in the way. A useless branch on a tree he believes belongs only to him and our father. Sean, my son, sees it all differently. He's perceptive more than a child should be. He sees how my father treats me, and he hates it. One evening, we were having dinner at the family estate. The tension was heavy, like always. My father scowled at my choice of report formatting, called my handling of a logistics contract embarrassingly passive. Aiden smirked, sipping wine like he was watching theater. I didn't respond. I never do. I sat quietly, cutting my steak, chewing slowly. Later that night, Sean stormed off. I heard the door to his room slam upstairs. I gave him some time, then climbed up the steps and knocked gently. Sean, I said, voice low. No response. I pushed the door open slowly. He was sitting on the edge of his bed, clutching his laptop tightly against his chest, his knees pulled up. Hey, buddy, I said, sitting beside him. He didn't look at me, just stared ahead, jaw clenched. Dad, he finally said, his voice trembling. Why don't you fight back? I blinked. Why do you let Grandpa say those awful things to you? He asked, turning to face me now, eyes wet. Why do you just sit there and take it? I felt something lodge in my throat. I couldn't speak. So I did the only thing I could. I pulled him into a hug, held him close, and whispered, I'm sorry, Sean. I just want everything to be okay. But the truth is nothing is okay. Miles Industries is teetering on the edge of something terrible. I've heard things. Whispers in the boardroom. Quiet conversations cut off the moment I enter. Words like failed investments, accounting irregularities, and shareholder pressure tossed around like loose change. I'm the CFO, at least on paper. But my father and Aiden, they never let me near the real data. They hand me glossy summaries, sanitized numbers, reports that shine but don't make sense. I know something's wrong. I feel it in my gut, but I don't ask. I don't dare, because I'm afraid. Afraid of that look my father gives, the one filled with contempt, as if I'm an insect crawling across his perfect desk. Afraid of Aiden's smirk, the way he tilts his head like he's watching a dog try to play chess. Every day, I walk into the office feeling like I've entered a battlefield without armor. The employees, most of them avoid my eyes. Some look at me with pity, a few with suspicion. They know I don't hold the reins. They know who really runs Miles Industries. Sean, he's the only one who makes me feel like I still matter. He'll sit with me after dinner, talking animatedly about his latest tech projects. How he programmed a robot to pick up trash automatically. How he hacked into the school's computer system to swap his friend's profile picture with a dancing banana. I laugh. I always laugh. But inside I worry. Sean is too smart. Too curious. I'm afraid that one day he'll dig too deep into this family's secrets, and that will pull him into dangerous territory. One evening, I sat in my study, the soft amber light casting long shadows over the scattered pile of papers on my desk. I wasn't really reading them, just staring, lost in numbers that had long since lost meaning. They were just symbols now, a language I used to understand, but that no longer spoke truth. The door creaked open, and I looked up. Sean walked in, his small figure lit from behind by the hallway light. He was holding a USB drive in one hand, his eyes wide, sparkling with that familiar gleam of curiosity and excitement. Dad, I want you to see this, he said, stepping closer. His voice brimmed with energy. I just wrote a program to analyze data. Imagine if I could apply it to Grandpa's company, maybe find ways to save money or catch some errors. He held the USB drive out to me like it was a trophy. I forced a smile and reached out to ruffle his hair. Sean, you're so smart, I said, genuinely proud. But beneath the surface a wave of unease rose in my chest. But the company, it's more complicated than you think. Just focus on school, okay? Sean's face fell slightly. He looked down, withdrawing the USB into his pocket. Dad, I just want to help, he murmured. Then he looked at me, eyes too knowing for a boy his age. I know you're not happy. I see it. His words cut through me like a blade. Clean. Deep. I opened my mouth, thought about telling him that I was fine, that I could handle everything, that he didn't need to worry. But I couldn't lie. Not to Sean. Instead, I reached out and pulled him into a hug. He let me. That night, long after he had gone to bed, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the soft whoosh of Puget Sound drifting through the cracked window. It should have been soothing, but it only reminded me how small I was. Insignificant. Drifting. I thought about my mother, about how many years she had endured my father's temper, his rules, his suffocating control. I thought about Sean, about how I didn't want him to grow up like I did, shadowed by a legacy that demanded obedience but never offered love. And then I thought about myself, a 40-year-old man, a CFO, a father, still feeling like a scared little boy every time I stood in front of my own father. Then came Tuesday. It started like any other gray skies, the familiar hum of early Seattle traffic, a quick stop for coffee I barely tasted. I drove to the Miles Industries headquarters in downtown, past the sea of skyscrapers that pierced the sky like steel monuments to ambition. The building that bore our name gleamed with mirrored glass, reflecting the blinding sunlight like armor. My office was on the 20th floor, spacious, sleek, windows that stretched wall to wall, overlooking Elliott Bay. From a distance, it looked like success, but inside, it made me feel small, like a child in a grown man's chair. Everything in that room, from the polished wood of the desk to the minimalist art on the walls, was designed to impress. But it didn't belong to me. Not really. I sat down, opened my laptop, and tried to focus. The financial reports filled my screen, rows and rows of numbers, projections, expenses. But they were hollow. I knew what they were: polished, manicured sheets designed to look healthy. The truth, whatever it was buried beneath layers of selective accounting. And I was just the rubber stamp, the signature at the bottom, the soulless seal of compliance. Anytime I asked questions about the growing list of unusual expenses, the ambiguous line items, the offshore transactions, my father would wave me off. "Liam, just do your job," he'd say, not even looking up from his desk. "Leave the big stuff to me and Aiden." And Aiden, always ready to twist the knife, would chuckle and add with that familiar smirk, "Big brother, don't worry. We've got it under control." But that morning, something was different. The air in the building was heavier charged. I passed by employees in the hallway whispering behind clipped smiles. Their eyes dropped when they saw me. No greetings, just nods. Awkward silence. I knew the look. Pity. Or maybe it was fear. When I stepped into the boardroom for the quarterly shareholders meeting, my breath caught slightly. My father and Aiden were already seated at the head of the table. My father in his expensive gray suit, perfectly tailored, his posture rigid with control. He fixed me with a stare that pierced right through my skin, sharp, cold, and heavy with judgment. Across from him, Aiden lounged in his chair with his usual smug smile, but I noticed it didn't quite reach his eyes today. There was a slight twitch in his fingers as he tapped them rhythmically against the polished table. Something was off. "Liam," my father began, his voice low, each syllable weighted with authority. "Today we need to have a serious talk." I swallowed hard. That tone, it brought me right back to childhood. To being scolded for spilling juice on his study carpet. To being told I would never amount to anything. I straightened in my chair, trying to sound calm. "Yes, sir," I replied, forcing the words through the dryness in my throat. "What's this about?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he slid a thick stack of documents across the table toward me. The pages landed in front of me with a dull thud that somehow echoed in the stillness of the boardroom. "Open it and see," he said, his voice colder than the wind off Elliott Bay in December. My hands trembled as I picked up the packet. It was a financial report, but not like the ones I usually received. No polished summaries or colorful graphs. This one was raw, brutal. The numbers were underlined in bold red ink. Expenses with vague descriptions. Transfers to accounts I didn't recognize. Dozens of handwritten notes in the margins, pointing out inconsistencies and questionable line items. And at the bottom of every page, my signature. The one I had scribbled hundreds of times over the years, often without reading the documents in full. Because my father always told me no, ordered me just sign, "Liam. Don't waste time." My voice cracked. "What is this?" My father leaned forward, his eyes like ice. "This," he said slowly, "is proof that you've embezzled $10 million from Miles Industries." The air rushed out of the room. My heart pounded against my ribs like it wanted to escape. I could hear the blood in my ears, loud and relentless. 10 million? What? I stammered. "Dad, I didn't. I would never do that." Aiden's voice slipped in, slick and smooth, like oil on water. "Liam, don't play innocent." He tilted his head, a mockery of concern on his face. "We've double-checked everything. Every transaction, every funnel, every transfer, it all went through accounts tied to you. Your signature is everywhere." I flipped through the documents, my hands shaking so badly I could barely keep the pages straight. It was all there. Dozens of lines. Money moved. Details. Amounts. Paper trails. But none of it made sense. I didn't recognize any of these transactions. It was a maze one I couldn't navigate. There was no exit. Only walls. "Dad, I swear," I said, my voice breaking. "I don't know anything about this. I just did what you and Aiden told me to do. I signed the reports you gave me. I trusted." My father's hand slammed down on the table with a crack so loud I flinched. My breath caught in my throat. "Don't make excuses, Liam," he thundered. "You're the CFO. You're responsible. Or are you saying you're so useless, you didn't even know where the company's money was going?" I sat frozen. My mouth opened, but nothing came out. He was right about one thing I hadn't known. I hadn't asked enough. I hadn't challenged him. I'd been afraid. I'd followed orders. But not because I was greedy or malicious. I had trusted them. My own family. Aiden leaned in then, his eyes cold despite the sympathetic tilt of his head. Liam, he said gently, as if we were allies, if you confess now, we might still be able to salvage the family's reputation. Don't let this go any further. Don't drag us all down with you. His words wrapped around me like a noose. I wanted to scream, to tell them I was being framed, that I was just a pawn, that they were the ones pulling the strings. But I couldn't. My tongue felt like lead, my mind a void. My body refused to move. I just sat there, like a trapped animal. My father stood up, towering over me, his eyes burning with disdain. He didn't shout this time, he didn't need to. His voice, sharp and final, cut deeper than any scream. Get ready to go to prison, you useless fool, he said. Don't expect me to go easy on you just because you're my son. And then he turned, walking out with the same spine-straight authority that had always haunted every room he entered. Aiden followed behind him, cool and composed, casting me one final glance. Not pity, not anger, satisfaction. I sat there, still, hands trembling, clutching the stack of documents like they were about to disappear. My stomach churned, my chest tight. My mind screamed for clarity, for something I could latch onto, but there was nothing. No evidence. No support. Just ink on paper and a noose tightening around my name. They had orchestrated it. All of it. I knew it with every part of me. My father and Aiden wanted me out of the way. Maybe to protect Miles Industries. Maybe just to protect themselves. Either way, I was the sacrifice. The scapegoat. I don't remember the drive home. I must have taken I-5, but the lights of the city blurred into meaningless color. When I pulled into the driveway, the porch light was on. Our house, my house, once a place of refuge, now looked unfamiliar. Cold. Inside, Celia was in the kitchen. She had her sleeves rolled up, chopping onions, humming faintly to herself. When she saw me, she froze. Liam, she said, setting the knife down. What's the matter? You look like you've seen a ghost. I couldn't hold it in. I told her everything. The boardroom, the accusations, the documents, my father's voice, Aiden's smirk, every word they hurled at me. Celia didn't say anything at first. She just took my hand, held it tightly in both of hers. Liam, she said, her voice low but firm, you didn't do anything wrong. I signed the papers, Celia, I whispered. I didn't read them. I trusted them. Like always. She shook her head. You trusted your family. That's not a crime. What they're doing is. We'll find a way. You can't let them pin this on you. But I didn't believe it. Not then. I felt like a man drowning, hands tied, watching the surface drift further and further out of reach. That evening, I didn't eat. I just sat in the living room staring out the window, watching the streetlights flicker against the darkness, trying to think. But every thought led me back to the same place, fear. I wasn't strong enough to confront them. Not my father. Not Aiden. Celia sat beside me for a while, holding my hand. Eventually, she kissed my forehead, whispered that we'd talk more in the morning, and went upstairs to bed. I stayed. Couldn't sleep. My thoughts were a carousel of failure and helplessness. Sometime past midnight, I heard soft footsteps on the stairs. I turned, and there stood Sean. He was wearing his favorite robot pajamas, hair messy, clutching his laptop like a security blanket. Dad, he said softly. I heard Mom talking. You didn't do anything wrong, did you? My throat closed up. I looked at him, my son, and my heart ached with shame. I didn't want him to see me like this, broken, confused, powerless. Sean. I paused. I don't even know what's happening anymore. He crossed the room and sat beside me on the couch, his small frame pressed against mine. I believe you, he said, looking up at me, his eyes shining with that fierce certainty only children seem capable of. And I'm going to help you. I promise. I tried to smile weakly. I didn't want him involved. He was just a kid. But part of me was grateful. Because in that moment, with my world unraveling, my 12-year-old son had more strength than I did. The next day, my phone rang. It was my mother. Liam, she whispered, her voice shaking. You need to be careful. Mom, what's going on? Your father, he's planning something. I don't know the details, but it doesn't feel right. She was breathless, her tone nervous, like she was looking over her shoulder. I tried to ask more, but she hung up. Just like that. Gone. My chest tightened. Something was coming. Something worse than what had already been thrown at me. They weren't just trying to push me out of Miles Industries. They were trying to destroy me. And I realized then if I didn't find a way to fight back, I'd lose everything. Not just my job, my name, my dignity, but Sean, Celia, the little pieces of myself that hadn't been eroded by years under my father's shadow. In the days that followed, I moved through life like a ghost. I showed up at work, Sat in my office. Avoided meetings. Avoided Aiden's eyes. When I came home, the only warmth left in my world was waiting for me. Celia and Sean were waiting for me. Celia tried to keep things normal. She cooked dinner every night: rosemary chicken, lentil stew, pasta with cream sauce, but I couldn't bring myself to eat any of it. I would just sit there at the table, pushing food around my plate with my fork, while Sean stared at me with those wide, worried eyes. He didn't say much, but his gaze alone was a question, a promise, and a plea all in one. Everything will be okay, he seemed to be saying. Just hold on. But I didn't feel okay. I hadn't in weeks. I was just Liam Miles, a name that carried weight only because of the man who gave it to me. A weak man, trapped in the long, merciless shadow of his father. And now, I was a man being fed to the wolves by my own blood. The subpoena had arrived a week ago, a plain envelope on the doorstep, but to me, it was a blade buried straight into my chest. Since then, sleep had become a memory. I sat in my study every night, hunched over the desk under the pale glow of a lamp, rereading those same documents over and over again, trying to find a single crack in the perfect wall they'd built around me. A loophole, a smudge, anything. But there was nothing. My father and Aiden had been thorough, ruthless. Every financial report was flawless in its deception. The transactions some I didn't even recognize were tied to accounts I had never seen, never approved, never touched. And yet my signature was there. Neat. Convincing. It was like staring at the paperwork of my own destruction. They hadn't just framed me. They'd written the story, played all the parts, and left me as the villain in the final act. As the court date loomed closer, I felt like a man walking toward the edge of a cliff. No guardrail, no rope, no one to pull me back. And beneath me, only the yawning dark. The morning of the trial, my hands wouldn't stop shaking. I stood in front of the mirror in our bedroom, trying for the 5th time to tie my tie. But the knot wouldn't form. My fingers fumbled like they didn't belong to me. Celia walked in, already dressed in a navy blouse and black skirt. She didn't say anything at first, just came up behind me and placed her hand gently on my shoulder. "Liam," she said softly, her reflection in the mirror meeting mine. "You'll get through this." I tried to smile, but it didn't reach my eyes. I didn't want her to see how scared I was. How broken. I cleared my throat, voice hoarse. "I don't know what happens after today." She tightened her grip on my shoulder. "Whatever happens, we face it together." The federal courthouse in downtown Seattle stood like a fortress of judgment. Towering stone, iron railings. As I stepped through the front doors, the cold air inside hit me like a wall. My breath caught. I felt like I was being led into a place where nothing human could survive. The courtroom was pristine and sterile. Polished wooden benches, pale gray walls, harsh fluorescent lights that made everything look sharper, harsher, colder. People murmured quietly around me: attorneys, clerks, strangers. But their voices were distant, like I was underwater. Then I saw them. My father, Gavin Miles, sitting in the front row. Regal. Immaculate. His gray suit looked like it cost more than my monthly salary, and yet it did nothing to dull the cold, sharp glint in his eyes. His face was stone. No warmth. No hesitation. Just purpose. Beside him sat Aiden. Confident. Comfortable. That smirk playing on his lips again, the same one from boardroom meetings, family dinners, holidays. The smirk of a man who had already won. They weren't just here to witness. They were here to finish it. The judge entered. An older man, stern and solemn, his presence commanding silence without needing to speak. He banged his gavel, and the murmurs stopped. Court is now in session. The prosecution, my father's lawyers, stood. There were 3 of them, all sharply dressed and smooth-spoken. The lead attorney, a man named Rourke, stepped forward. He had a practiced, effortless charm, but his eyes were as dead as glass. "Your Honor," he began, turning to face the bench. "We are here today to present clear and compelling evidence that Mr. Liam Miles, acting as Chief Financial Officer of Miles Industries, has committed multiple counts of corporate fraud and embezzlement." He paused, then gestured toward the table in front of him where thick folders and binders were stacked in neat, ominous piles. "These documents show a calculated, deliberate siphoning of company funds totaling $10 million routed through a series of foreign accounts, each transaction authorized by Mr. Miles's own signature." I sat motionless, my throat dry, hands clenched in my lap. My name echoed in that courtroom like a curse. "Liam Miles," Rourke said again, his voice as smooth as a snake's, "has embezzled $10 million from company funds, causing severe damage to Miles Industries and its shareholders." I sat beside my lawyer, an old college friend, Marco Hanley, who had taken on my case more out of loyalty than confidence. He wasn't a high-powered defense attorney. He didn't drive a Mercedes or wear tailored Italian suits. But he believed me. That counted for something. Still, As he stood and tried to cast doubt on the prosecution's documents, I could see the weight of the battle he was fighting. Every objection he raised was swatted away. Every attempt to challenge the source of the documents was drowned under the avalanche of evidence my father's legal team presented. They had resources we couldn't match: analysts, experts, polished witnesses. It wasn't a fight. It was an execution. Then they called Aiden to the stand. He walked up like he owned the courtroom, calm, polished, charming in that infuriating way of his. Dressed in a tailored navy suit, his blonde hair perfectly styled, he looked like the picture of corporate integrity. The jury leaned in as he spoke. "My brother," Aiden began, his tone practiced and soft, "has always struggled with the weight of responsibility. I'm deeply sorry to say this." He paused for effect, lowering his eyes as if the words wounded him. "But Liam betrayed our family and the company. He siphoned funds, falsified records, and used Miles Industries as his personal piggy bank. It was a masterpiece of performance. A knife in the heart delivered with a gentle smile. And it worked. I could feel the courtroom turning against me." Jurors averted their eyes. Some scribbled notes. My father watched from the front row, arms crossed, jaw set. When our eyes met, I saw it clearly. "You deserve this, Liam. You've always been a failure." I wanted to scream. I wanted to rise to my feet and shout the truth. That I had only ever done what they told me. That I had trusted the wrong people. But I couldn't. My voice was buried beneath the weight of shame and disbelief. I lowered my head. The room felt smaller, the air thinner. My breathing grew shallow, like I was underwater and sinking fast. Marco placed a hand on my arm and leaned in. "I'm going to call you to the stand," he said quietly. "You have to speak. It's your only chance." I nodded, though I wasn't sure I could even form a sentence. My whole body felt like it was made of stone. "Then, Your Honor, I have evidence." The voice rang out like a thunderclap through the courtroom. My head snapped up. There, at the back of the room, standing tall in his wrinkled school uniform and scuffed sneakers, was Sean, my son. Celia stood beside him, panic etched across her face as she tried to pull him back. But Sean stood his ground, eyes blazing with fire I had never seen before. "I'm Sean Miles," he said, loud and clear. "Liam Miles's son. And I have evidence proving my dad is innocent." The room exploded. Gasps. Murmurs. Chairs scraped against the floor. People craned their necks to get a better look. My father leapt to his feet. "What is this kid doing here?" he roared, face crimson with rage. "This is no place for children." Aiden looked less composed than usual. His smug expression faltered. I saw something unfamiliar in his eyes: panic. The judge slammed his gavel. "Order. Order in the courtroom." He looked at Sean, frowning, then spoke with a voice that was stern, but not unkind. "Young man, you say you have evidence? Explain yourself." Sean nodded and stepped forward, gripping a small USB drive tightly in his hand. "I have video footage and documents," he said, "proving that my grandfather, Gavin Miles, and my uncle Aiden set my dad up to take the blame." I felt all the blood drain from my face. "Sean," I breathed, trying to rise from my seat. But Marco gripped my arm. "Let him speak," he whispered. Celia looked at me from across the room, terror in her eyes. But she didn't stop Sean. None of us could. He was already in motion, already standing in front of the court like he was meant to be there. And as I watched him, his back straight, his chin lifted, his hand still gripping the USB like a sword, I realized something. Sean wasn't just a curious boy with a love for technology. He was brave, braver than I had ever been. Sean cleared his throat and began to speak. "I love technology, and I mess around with it sometimes," he said. His eyes scanned the courtroom. The moment Sean spoke, the entire courtroom seemed to hold its breath. "A few months ago," he said, "I secretly installed a mini camera in my grandfather's home office. I didn't mean any harm, I just wanted to see how he worked, thinking maybe I could learn something from him." I stared at him, wide-eyed. My pulse thundered in my ears. I had no idea he'd done any of this. The room was silent, every eye fixed on my son. My father's jaw tightened. His fists clenched at his sides. Aiden, beside him, had started tapping his fingers on the arm of his chair, a nervous tic he'd had since we were kids. The only time he ever did that was when he wasn't in control. Sean's voice was calm, steady. "Last week," he continued, "I reviewed the footage from the camera. I overheard a conversation between my grandfather and Uncle Aiden. They talked about framing my dad, saying he was the scapegoat to save the company from an investigation." He held up the USB drive. His hand didn't even shake. "I saved that footage here." My heart pounded. The room was still, as if the walls themselves were listening. But Sean wasn't finished. "I also found important documents," he added. His voice brimmed with quiet confidence, like he was doing something he knew had to be done, no matter the cost. "One day when Grandpa wasn't home, I sneaked into his office. I knew he had security on his computer, but I hacked into it. He paused, just for a second, long enough for every adult in the room to register what he had just confessed to. I learned how to crack passwords from the robotics club. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. My 12-year-old son had broken into my father's computer. He had gone behind enemy lines alone and pulled out the truth. Something I hadn't been able to do. Something I had been too broken, too scared to even attempt. I found emails and internal accounting files, he said. They proved that Grandpa and Uncle Aiden falsified the books to frame my dad. A wave of murmurs swept through the courtroom. The gallery stirred. People whispered to one another. The judge leaned forward slightly. The bailiff's hand hovered near the gavel. My father bolted upright, red-faced and furious. "This kid is lying," he shouted. "He's just a child. How could he possibly hack my computer?" But the judge held up a hand, calm but firm. "Mr. Miles, please sit down." Sean walked to the clerk and handed over the USB drive. My fingers gripped the edge of the table so tightly. A screen was wheeled into place, and the lights dimmed. Then the footage played. My father's voice boomed from the speakers, cold and deliberate. "Pin it all on Liam. He's useless. Let him take the fall for us. I told the accounting team to manipulate the numbers. His signature is everywhere. No one will suspect a thing." The courtroom gasped. Then Aiden's voice, smooth and confident. "All right, Dad. I'll make sure the board believes Liam is the traitor. Once he's out of the way, we'll get through this investigation." My throat tightened. I felt like I'd been punched in the chest. That was it. There it was. The truth, exposed for the entire courtroom to see. I glanced at Sean, still standing there, small but defiant. He didn't look at me. His gaze was fixed on the screen, like a soldier watching the enemy fall. The judge requested to see the documents Sean had uncovered. A clerk inserted the USB and pulled up the files. The emails came first, then spreadsheets and memos. Line after line, transaction after transaction, all clearly annotated. Everything matched the scheme. It was all there laid bare on the courtroom screen. Every lie, every forged number, every manipulated account, every single way my father and Aiden had manipulated the books. There were transfers to foreign accounts, expenses without invoices, all of them expertly forged to make it look like I was the one behind it. As the documents appeared one after another on the courtroom screen, I could feel the blood drain from my father's face. He tried to object, his voice raised in frustration, but it lacked the thunderous authority it usually carried. He was unraveling. Aiden just sat there, silent, his smirk gone, his face pale. The judge called for a recess to verify the legality of the evidence. I exhaled, the tension in my chest loosening, if only slightly. My body moved on instinct as I found Sean and pulled him into a corner of the hallway, away from everyone. I dropped to one knee and hugged him tightly. My voice cracked as I whispered, "You did amazing, Sean. I mean it. You did something I never even dared to dream of." His small arms wrapped around me. "But listen," I continued, lowering my voice even more, "you have to be careful. Grandpa, he won't forgive this. You've seen what he's capable of." Sean pulled back slightly, looking me dead in the eye. There was no hesitation, no fear. Just raw, blinding resolve. "I'm not scared, Dad," he said firmly. "I just want to protect you." That shattered me. I hugged him again, tighter than before. I wanted to wrap my entire body around him and shield him from the world. In that moment, I felt a strength I never knew I had because it wasn't mine alone anymore. It belonged to Sean, to Celia, to us. No matter what came next, I wasn't going to let him fight this alone. When the trial resumed, the judge returned, his expression grim and calm. I held my breath as he spoke. "The court has conducted a preliminary verification of the evidence presented by Mr. Sean Miles," he said. "The video footage and documents from Mr. Gavin Miles's personal computer appear authentic at this stage." He paused, then continued. "We need more time to assess the legality and authenticity of this evidence in full," he said. "But what has been presented today is sufficient to temporarily suspend the charges against Mr. Liam Miles. The trial will resume next week, with accounting and technical experts brought in to further evaluate the material." My father shot to his feet like a man struck by lightning. His voice roared across the courtroom. "This is a farce," he shouted, pointing directly at Sean. "That kid broke into my private property. This evidence is illegal." Aiden quickly stood beside him, trying to contain the damage with his usual polished tone. "Your Honor," he said, "we respectfully request this so-called evidence be dismissed from the record. A 12-year-old cannot be considered a credible witness. This is outrageous." Marco, my lawyer, stood calmly. "Your Honor, the evidence is clear and verifiable," he said, steady as stone. "We request that the court summon additional witnesses from Miles Industries' accounting department to further clarify the transactions in question." The judge nodded, scribbled something in his notes, then raised his gavel and brought it down with a sharp crack. Session adjourned, he announced. I turned to look at my father. His gaze found mine and then shifted to Sean, ice cold, hard as steel, and brimming with a quiet threat. I knew then, this wasn't over. He wouldn't let it be. The days that followed bled together into sleepless nights. Celia and I did everything we could to protect Sean. We kept him home from school, locked the doors, checked the windows twice. My father had resources, power, and no conscience. If he wanted to retaliate, he could. But Sean refused to be afraid. If I'm scared, he told me one night, then Grandpa wins, Dad. I didn't know how a 12-year-old could be stronger than me, but he was. He just was. Marco continued to work tirelessly. Every day he made calls, followed leads, sent emails to people who had once worked for Miles Industries, but left under mysterious or strange circumstances. Some of them didn't answer. Some hung up. But one finally agreed. Her name was Abigail. She was a former accounting analyst, and she had left the company 2 years ago under what had always been described to me as a personnel conflict. Now I knew better. Marco called me late that evening with a quiet urgency in his voice. She's in, he said. Abigail has agreed to testify. Abigail had once been the head of accounting at Miles Industries, sharp, ethical, and respected. I remembered her from staff meetings, always composed, always careful with her words. But now, as she stood in the witness box, I barely recognized her. Her hands trembled slightly as she held the microphone, her voice shaky but determined. I didn't want to do it, she said, eyes flicking toward my father and Aiden. But Mr. Gavin, he threatened to ruin my career if I didn't comply. A lump formed in my throat. I couldn't speak. I just watched, listened, as the truth slowly peeled away the lies that had nearly buried me. She detailed the secret meetings, how they instructed her to manipulate figures, to create fake transactions, all with the intention of framing me. Each word she spoke felt like another weight lifted from my chest, though at the same time, it deepened my rage. Not just for what they did to me, but for dragging innocent people like Abigail into it. Marco wasted no time. He brought in the technical experts he'd hired to verify the files Sean had retrieved. They explained how the accounting documents had been altered, falsified timestamps, edited metadata. One of them even pulled up a side-by-side analysis showing how the originals differed from the doctored versions. Then came the footage. The team confirmed that Sean's mini-camera footage hadn't been tampered with in any way. The timestamps matched. The audio was unedited. My father's voice, the cold ruthlessness in it was exactly as Sean had captured. Each frame was a nail in the coffin they'd built for me, and that we were now dismantling, piece by piece. But still, I couldn't relax. My father had power, deep roots, a reach far longer than anything I could fathom. He could twist things, bury things, make people disappear. And when the next trial session arrived, just a week later, that fear became flesh. He and Aiden had brought in a new legal team. Not just any firm, this one was led by a man known for flipping unwinnable cases on their heads. He was slick, dressed like a senator, and had the courtroom hanging on every perfectly enunciated word. They didn't waste time. They attacked Sean's evidence with everything they had. His actions were illegal, my father's new lawyer said, his tone oozing condescension. Installing a hidden camera and hacking into a personal computer. This violates several privacy statutes. He turned, deliberately locking eyes with the jury. And let's not forget, this witness is 12 years old. A child, easily manipulated, possibly by the defendant himself, Mr. Liam Miles. My fists curled under the table. My jaw clenched so tight I thought it might snap. But I said nothing. I couldn't afford an outburst, not now. Marco stood, composed. Your Honor, he said, voice steady. The evidence was not only retrieved from Mr. Gavin Miles's computer, it has since been corroborated by multiple independent witnesses and third-party experts. He stepped closer to the bench. These forged documents bear Liam Miles's signature. Yes, but there is no direct evidence that he executed or even authorized the transactions. Everything points to orchestration by others. Then it happened. Sean was called to the witness stand. I couldn't breathe. He walked up slowly, wearing his school uniform, his shirt tucked in a little unevenly. He looked so small up there, but as he sat down and adjusted the microphone, I saw no fear, just clarity, and something more powerful than anything else in that room: purpose. He began to speak. I installed the camera in my grandfather's office, he said calmly. I just wanted to see how he worked. I wasn't trying to get anyone in trouble. He told them about the computer, about how he'd used what he learned in robotics club to break in. He didn't embellish. He didn't flinch. I just wanted to protect my dad, he said, glancing at me briefly. I knew he didn't do anything wrong, and I couldn't let Grandpa and Uncle Aiden destroy him. The room was silent. Only his breath, faint and rhythmic, came through the mic. The judge leaned forward, brow creased, but his voice softened. Young man, he said, You understand that what you did may have broken the law, don't you? Sean nodded, his face solemn. Yes, Your Honor, he said. But I had no other choice. I just wanted the truth to come out. I looked at Sean, my heart full and heavy all at once. Proud didn't even begin to cover what I felt this boy, my son, had put everything on the line for me. At 12, he'd faced down men with more power, more money, more cruelty than most ever will in a lifetime. And me, I had just sat there, afraid, doubting, too beaten down to stand on my own. I wanted to leap from my seat, to run up and wrap him in my arms, to whisper how sorry I was that he had to carry this weight. But the courtroom still demanded its silence, and I could only sit watching, aching, hoping. The hearings that followed were a slow, methodical unraveling of everything my father and Aiden had built on lies. Abigail returned to the stand, and this time her voice was stronger, steadier. She spoke with conviction, outlining the exact moments when she had been forced to alter records, how Aiden hovered over her shoulder, how my father's threats echoed in the back of her mind. Then came the technical experts again. Calm, clinical. They laid out timestamps, digital fingerprints, and system logs that traced the fake transactions right back to Aiden's machine. Not mine. My father tried to argue, tried to summon the fire he used to command boardrooms and courtrooms alike. But his voice cracked. He stammered. There was no conviction left in him, just desperation. Aiden didn't even try. He sat with his hands folded, gaze fixed on a distant point beyond the courtroom walls. He knew. It was over. Finally, the day of the verdict arrived. I barely slept the night before. My nerves were so frayed I could feel them in my teeth. Celia held my hand the entire morning, her thumb gently brushing over my skin, trying to soothe the storm inside me. When the judge stood, the courtroom froze. Based on the evidence presented, he began, voice steady and unwavering. The court finds that Liam Miles is not guilty of embezzlement. The charges against him are dismissed. The world tilted. For a second, I couldn't breathe, not out of fear, but out of release. He continued. Instead, the evidence indicates that Gavin Miles and Aiden Miles orchestrated a scheme of financial fraud, manipulating records to frame Liam Miles. The silence cracked into a wave of murmurs. I felt as though someone had peeled the lead off my chest. I exhaled like I hadn't in years. Celia burst into quiet sobs and clutched my arm so tightly I could feel her nails dig into my sleeve. And then Sean ran. He threw his arms around me and hugged me so fiercely I thought he'd never let go. Dad, he whispered, his voice thick, I knew you'd be okay. I kissed the top of his head and held him close, blinking back tears. I didn't want to cry in front of the world. But I didn't care anymore. I held my son and my wife and let the tears fall. My father and Aiden were led out of the courtroom in cuffs. My father didn't shout or struggle. He just turned his head and looked at me. For the first time in my life, I didn't see anger or disdain in his eyes, just emptiness. As if something had been taken from him and he didn't know how to live without it. Aiden didn't look at anyone. He just kept his eyes down, his face blank, his legacy crumbling beneath his polished shoes. They were both charged with financial fraud and would face prison and heavy reparations to the company they claimed to protect. As we stepped outside into the daylight, I hugged Celia and Sean again. The sun felt different, warmer, real. I had my life back, not just my name, not just my career, my soul, my family, my pride. This wasn't just my victory. It was Sean's. He had stood against an empire and brought it down with nothing but courage, intelligence, and love. More than a year passed after the trial. Life returned in quiet, beautiful fragments. We moved to a small house in suburban Seattle, simple, modest, peaceful. Some mornings, like this one, I stood by the window just watching. Sean was in the garden, laughing as he tinkered with a clunky, brilliant robot that bent forward and tried to pick up a leaf. He cheered when it managed to wobble upright. That laugh, it was everything. I smiled, my heart lighter than it had been in years. For the first time, I wasn't weighed down by shame or fear or guilt. The chains that had bound me to the past were finally gone. I was no longer a criminal. I was no longer a broken man. I was a father, free. Then, one cold autumn morning, Marco called. I picked up the phone, and before he even spoke, I knew what it was. The final verdict had come in. Marco called to tell me about it. They didn't say a word, Liam. Marco told me over the phone. Gavin just sat there, silent. Aiden kept his head down. No emotion. Nothing. He paused. They probably knew there was no way out. I thanked him and ended the call, setting the phone on the kitchen table and staring at it for a long moment. I should have felt victorious, triumphant, vindicated. But all I felt was hollow. My father had once been the towering force in my life, the man whose approval I chased and whose anger I feared. And Aiden was supposed to be my brother, my blood, There had been a time I would have given anything for him to simply see me. Not as competition, not as someone in the way, just as family. But they had made their choices. They'd crafted a lie, lived in it, and weaponized it against me. There was no coming back from that. All I could do now was live forward for myself, and for the two people who had stood by me when no one else did. Miles Industries descended into chaos after the trial. Investors pulled back, shareholders panicked, and the board scrambled to patch what was left of the company's image. They called me in within days of the final verdict. Liam, one of the directors, said, "You've shown integrity under fire. The company needs someone like you. We want you to lead us through this." They offered me the chairmanship. I listened. I nodded. I thanked them. But the moment I stepped into my old office, I couldn't breathe. The floor-to-ceiling glass, the smell of polished wood, the echo of my father's footsteps down the corridor, everything about it felt like a cage. I wasn't that man. I didn't want to be that man. Every meeting felt like a ghost whispering in my ear. Every glance from the boardroom table a reminder of all the years I'd spent living in Gavin Miles's shadow. One evening, after Sean had finished his homework and Celia had finished washing the dishes, I gathered the courage I'd been waiting on. We sat in the living room, the soft hum of the heater in the background, Sean curled up with his laptop, Celia next to me on the couch. "I want to resign," I said quietly. Celia looked up, surprised but calm. "Liam, I've been thinking about it for a while," I continued, steadying my voice. "I'm not built for corporate war zones. I don't want the meetings, the backroom politics, the endless stress. I want something real, something mine. No more boardrooms or quarterly projections." Celia reached for my hand, her eyes holding mine. "What do you want to do, Liam?" I smiled, and for a second, it felt like I was 20 again, back before my father had buried all my dreams under his expectations. "I want to open a small restaurant," I said. "Something cozy. I love cooking, Celia. Always have. It's the one place I feel like myself. Ever since I was a kid, I wanted to be in the kitchen, mixing flavors, trying recipes, watching people smile after that first bite." I laughed softly, remembering. "But Dad always said a man should aim higher. That kitchens were for workers, not leaders. That dreams were distractions." Sean perked up, pulling his headphones down. "Wait, pizza?" he asked, eyes lighting up. "You're gonna make pizza?" I grinned. "Not just pizza. Pasta. Stews. Maybe that roasted lamb you love so much." Sean hooped and threw his arms in the air. "Dad, that's awesome. I'll be your taste tester." His laughter was so pure, it cracked something in me in a good way. Celia squeezed my hand and leaned her head on my shoulder. "If that's what you want," she said softly, "I'm with you. Always." I resigned a week later. The board tried to convince me to stay. "Liam," one of them pleaded, "you've saved this company. We need you to see it through." But my mind was made up. I shook every hand, thanked them for the opportunity, and stood by my decision. Before leaving, I handed over my responsibilities to Abigail, the same Abigail who had bravely testified at the trial. She was hesitant at first. "Are you sure about this?" she asked me in the conference room, her brow furrowed. "I've never been more sure of anything," I replied. "You're smart, you're honest, and you've got a spine most people only pretend to have. Miles Industries needs someone like that. Someone like you." She smiled, humbled. "Thank you, Liam. I won't let you down. I know you won't." When I stepped out of that glass skyscraper for the last time, I paused on the pavement outside and looked up. The building glinted under the Seattle sun, tall, reflective, imposing. It had been a cage for so long. But now, as the doors closed behind me, I felt something lift. The burden, the expectations, the shame. I was no longer the CFO, no longer my father's puppet. I was just Liam, and I was finally ready to start again. My restaurant, Miles's Kitchen, opened quietly on a corner near Puget Sound. Nothing extravagant, just a cozy space with warm lighting, wood tables, and the kind of charm that made people feel at home. It wasn't the kind of place my father would have taken clients or celebrated deals, but it was mine. I spent long hours in the kitchen kneading dough for fresh bread, fine-tuning marinara sauces made from ripe tomatoes, perfecting my apple pie crust until it came out just right. There was joy in it. Joy I hadn't known I was missing all those years behind spreadsheets and boardroom doors. The first customers were friends, a few old colleagues. They gave polite compliments, left generous tips. But slowly, word spread. People returned. Strangers came in, sat down, smiled after the first bite. "This pie tastes like my grandma's," one woman told me, teary-eyed. Another man grinned over his third bowl of stew. "You got a secret in this. Feels like a hug in a bowl." And I realized I was finally doing something I loved. One afternoon, my mother walked through the restaurant doors. She looked different, lighter somehow. She sat across from me in a quiet moment and held her coffee between both hands. "I've filed for divorce," she said, her voice even but resolute. I blinked. "You did?" She nodded. I've put up with him for too long. The lies, the control, the silence. It's over. I reached out, took her hand. You deserve peace, Mom. I want to live for myself now, she said, a faint smile touching her lips. And I want to be close to you and Sean, if you'll have me. Of course we will, I said. Come stay with us. We've got space, and more importantly, we've got love. Celia and Sean welcomed her like she'd always belonged. Celia gave her the sunniest room in the house. Sean hugged her so tightly it made her laugh. And that laughter, it was like hearing a forgotten song. Our home changed after that. It came alive. Sean still buried himself in tech projects. Wires always tangled across the floor, but he made time to help in the kitchen, though he snuck more bites than he prepped ingredients. Celia ran the front of the restaurant like she was born to do it, managing bookings and suppliers with the same calm efficiency that had once held our fractured family together. And my mother, she found a corner seat in the restaurant she liked. Most days she sat there with a novel in one hand, chatting with customers in between chapters, like she was reclaiming time, one gentle hour at a time. There were no more meetings, no more shadows of men who once ruled over us. Just the clatter of dishes, the scent of rosemary and garlic, the laughter of family echoing through a space filled with warmth. We were no longer under pressure, no longer under contemptuous glares or silencing commands. We were just a family, living simply and happily. One evening after the restaurant had closed, I stepped out onto the small balcony just above the kitchen. The city was quiet. Seattle's usual hum softened into a gentle hush. The breeze was cool, crisp with salt, and the waters of Puget Sound shimmered under the moonlight like a silver curtain. I leaned on the railing, letting the moment settle in my bones. The air smelled faintly of oregano and fresh bread, traces of the day's work still clinging to the walls. I breathed in deeply, exhaled slowly, and let the silence wrap around me. A soft creak behind me made me turn. Sean stepped out onto the balcony, holding 2 mugs of cocoa. He wore his hoodie, sleeves too long for his arms, and those same worn-out socks with holes he refused to throw away. He handed me a mug and stood beside me, looking out at the same view. "Dad," he said after a moment, his voice soft but full of something deeper, something steady, "I think you did the right thing." I looked at him, surprised. "What do you mean? Leaving the company? Starting this?" He nodded toward the restaurant downstairs. "I like seeing you happy." The cocoa in my hand warmed my fingers, but it was his words that warmed my chest. I bent down and hugged him tightly, resting my chin against his unruly hair. "Thank you, Sean," I said, my voice rough. "If it weren't for you, I don't know where I'd be." He smiled and rested his head on my shoulder. "Dad, I just wanted you to be free." I closed my eyes. Free. That word had once felt unreachable, like something meant for other people. People who hadn't grown up under a shadow. People who hadn't been told who to be, how to speak, what to dream. But now I knew what it meant. I was free. No longer my father's puppet. No longer the hollow figure behind a corporate desk. No longer the shadow of Miles Industries. I was Liam Miles. A husband, a father, a chef, and above all, a man who had found himself again. Miles's kitchen wasn't just a restaurant. It was a home. A place where flour and fire and family came together to build something honest. Something no one, not even my father, could take away. Seattle's wind still carried its bite. Puget Sound still sparkled beneath the stars. But I no longer felt small before the world. I had found my place. And I knew no matter what life brought, I would never let myself be imprisoned again. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.